Welcome to a new edition of the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino. On this episode, we talk with novelist, writing coach, and marketer Charlene Thomas. As the author of young adult fiction, her debut novel was Seton Girls and released with Penguin Random House in 2022. Her sophomore novel, Streetlight People, came out on November 5, 2024. A third one is in the works for the summer of 2025. She was 16 when she wrote a manuscript that won the National Novel Silver Award from Scholastic Books and went on to minor in creative writing at North Carolina State University. She's a big dreamer and believes a lot in people and what all of us are capable of, and maybe that's why she loves creating big characters who are steadfastly determined to change their own little parts of the world. From her base in the Washington D.C. area, we get into it all. Enjoy.
Yeah, no, I'm ready when you are. Thanks again for having me on. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, me too. Absolutely. And I'm looking forward to getting into your life as a writer and a marketer and a coach. So I want to know first and foremost, getting through the pandemic was quite a thing, and it was a regional thing. It affected all of us in a different way, depending on where we were at. But we all definitely came to a fork in the road. How much of what you did and changed and survived through during that time has reverberated into your life right now in 2025 that you still feel?
Yeah, a lot has happened in my life since the pandemic. So I was actually living in New York City when the pandemic hit. So I think in a lot of ways, New York City was sort of one of the first major cities in the US to get it really, really bad, just given the way that New York City runs. We're on top of each other, we're crammed onto trains. So I ended up relocating at that time to come back home. Actually, my parents lived in this area. And so I ended up moving back home for what I thought was going to be honestly like a week or so. And it ended up being until now. So I was one of those that, went back home, ended up buying a house in the area, ended up staying long term. And for me, I think the remote lifestyle that sort of emerged from the pandemic really affected the way I started to think about like our productivity as individuals and our need to be in a physical office environment if we wanted to be able to contribute to, the broader corporate America. And I sort of established very strong feelings that I felt a lot more productive when I was out of the office. And when I started to see how much more I could do with my life when I was able to work from my house, it really helped me just sort of shuffle my priorities a little bit. And realize what really mattered to me. So I ended up actually signing with my agent during the pandemic. I signed with my agent in 2020. I ended up selling my first book during the pandemic. That was in 2021. I ended up leaving my full-time job in corporate America during the pandemic, 2022. And really just sort of jumped with both feet into this, writing lifestyle. And I'm super glad that I shifted my life in this way. I've always been a very passionate person and very motivated by purpose. And I feel such a greater sense of self now that I'm focused on what I think I'm meant to do, which is storytell and help other people storytell. Instead of, committing sometimes 15-hour days to, a pretty heavy corporate marketing grind.
So let's get to the heart and soul of all these things that you do on a daily basis here in 2025. If I was to put you in front of a bunch of grade school kids, third graders, it's career day, and one of the kids in the back of the room says, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" How do you answer them?
Yeah, first off, it's so crazy that you keep saying 2025 and I'm like, what? But it is 2025, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, if a grade schooler or anybody asked me what I do for a living, I would say that I tell stories and I help other people figure out the stories that they want to tell. I think it's really important for us as human beings to storytell. It is the longest sort of form of sharing our histories that has ever existed. And without telling stories, we lose so much of who we are. So that's what I do. I tell stories and I help other people figure out the stories that they want to tell.
So, talk to me a little bit about what you wanted to be when you were a kid. Let's say 10, 11-year-old range, or just somewhere in that range. What did you want to be? What was your dream to grow up and become?
To be honest, I didn't know. And hopefully that's reassuring to some people. I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. I knew that I loved writing even at that time. I didn't piece together that writing could be something that I could do for a career or for a future. So, yeah, I went through phases where I wanted to be everything from, you know, a hairstylist to wanting to like work in publishings. And eventually I sort of pursued different tracks and ended up going the marketing route because for me that sort of married the storytelling that I like to do and the creativity, but also like a quote unquote big girl job and that sort of thing. But ultimately didn't really appreciate that maybe I could do what I love for my life until a couple of years ago.
So, talk to me a little bit about how you got to this point. Take me back to where you were born and raised. You had mentioned DC. Talk to me about the seeds that were planted that helped you grow this career that you have today.
Yeah, I was always really fortunate to both be in a household where books were valued and appreciated, and also just amongst a friend group that thought it was cool that I wrote books. That so I think both of those things sort of reassured me in a way that I recognize devoid of that environment, things might have been really different. So I first started writing. I didn't even realize I was writing books, but it sounds kind of crazy. I first started writing books around like 7 years old. And I would just write in those like spiral notebooks that you get from like CVS or those little composition notebooks that kind of look like cowhide. And I would write in those and just write stories. And it turned out to sort of just be the thing that I would do whenever I was bored or whenever I wanted to relax, or sometimes I would just have an idea and start writing it down. And by the time I was in high school, I had probably written like 30 different books. And at that point, I was editor in chief of my high school newspaper. I was getting ready for college, kind of trying to figure out what am I going to major in? What am I going to do? And I came across the Scholastic Art and Writing Awards, which is a really amazing program that acknowledges the greatest creative work that high schoolers are doing across the country. And I saw it and I was like, well, I'm just going to apply for this. You had to have a teacher sponsor. So my journalism teacher sponsored me, which was her first time even realizing I wrote books. But I was like, yeah, I write books. I'd like to apply. Will you sponsor me? And she was like, of course. So I ended up applying for that, kind of forgot about it, to be honest with you. And then she ended up calling me one day after school. And I remember she was freaking out and she was like, I just got a call from Scholastic and they said that you won the National Novel Silver Award and that you are invited to go to Carnegie Hall to get your award and just all these things. And I was stunned. And I think that really sort of catapulted me into feeling like, oh, I'm kind of good at this, beyond just what like your friends and family are obligated to tell you. And going to New York, having that experience, that was sort of my first real moment. At that point, I was around 17. That was my first real moment of feeling confident about what I was doing. Um, and from there, I actually tried to look for an agent for the first time. And I ended up signing with an agent, a literary agent, when I was 18. And it was a really negative experience for me. Within the industry, they have a term for agents that sort of act unethically, and they call them schmagents. And I was young, I was uneducated about the industry, and I ended up sort of signing with one of those instead of a more reputable, ethical literary agency. And it really scarred me for a long time. From there, I was sort of like, nope, publishing isn't for me. And I did take some creative writing classes in college, but I didn't really think seriously about publishing anymore for a few years because I was just really scared. And for me, what really sort of shook me out of that, I think, was just the purpose that I think, my purpose is in being a writer, sort of made it impossible for me to not keep writing. And as hard as I sort of tried to steer myself in a different direction, when my heart had things to say, when my soul had things to say, I went back to writing stories. And I sort of slowly but surely dipped my toe back into this whole publishing world. And that was around the pandemic when I think things were changing so much for everybody that for me, that sort of inspired me to just sort of be like, well, if this can happen, anything can happen. And I, sort of jumped with both feet at that point and haven't really looked back since.
So, what was the book for you growing up that was seminal, that was huge, that you loved?
Wow, that's such a good question. Um, I really loved The Giver. I think that that is such a powerful story. Um, I also really loved, I don't know if you've ever read them, but the Shel Silverstein
Oh, yeah.
poetry books.
Yeah.
Um, it just stunning, gorgeous, incredible, perfect. And then my favorite author of all time is definitely Maya Angelou. I'm trying to think when I read her for the first time. I probably started reading some of her poetry around mid high school. And I think, don't quote me on this, but I do think we read I Know Why the Cage Bird Sings in late high school, but I don't know for sure. It might have been a college read, but yeah, I would say that those are some of the ones that I really enjoyed growing up.
So, when you look at your life personally and professionally over all these years, who's been that hero, that role model, that bedrock for you in your life?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would definitely say my parents. I've been blessed with who I believe are the most incredible parents in the world. And I'd mentioned earlier that from the pandemic starting to now, like a lot of things have changed in my life. And not one of the biggest thing that has changed in my life was that my dad actually passed away at the end of 2022, which was by far the most transformational thing that I have ever experienced. Grief is a whole different beast. And I think that going through that has not only changed who I am, but it also changed how I think about life and and the things that I want to write about and the ways that I want to write about them. So, you know, even now, my dad is having such an incredible impact on my life. And, my mom, who I'm so grateful for, is so incredibly supportive of all the things that I'm trying to do. And I think that just feeling like you have people who are really in your corner, who are going to be there for you and love you no matter what, for me, it changes everything. So I would definitely say my parents would have to be the greatest impact that I have ever had in my life.
So, what's the inspiration for you every day to wake up and to do this work that you do, to do it at a high level, to evolve as a human being yourself? What's that collective gumption every day?
I think because I know that what I'm doing matters. I think that as someone who has found such peace in books and such reassurance and such comfort, escapism, just really having books there when I needed them just to feel okay and like things are going to be okay. Um, Knowing the power that words can have for other people makes me know that what I'm doing is important. And we haven't talked much about it, but I'm also a writing coach, and the ability to help other people take the words inside of them that do matter and that are important, and they just might be struggling with getting them on the page or the confidence to do it or understanding the processes to try and pursue publication. Knowing that I'm also helping other people share the words that only they can share is the entire reason why I know what I'm doing is so important.
So, if you had a dream tonight, ran into let's say, an 18-year-old version of you, and you could give that young version of you a piece of advice based on this life you've lived, the wisdom you've gained, what advice would you impart?
I would probably say that you don't know everything,
Hmm.
um, but that things are going to be okay. And to start paying more attention to all the amazing things that you have instead of the things that you want. And if you can focus on the good parts, and if you can keep putting one foot in front of the other, that you're going to make progress and things are going to be okay.
So, at the of all of these things that you've done and accomplished in your life, what are you ultimately the proudest of?
I think I'm the proudest of what people have had to say about working with me, and about what people have had to say about my work. Not because I'm overindulgent about praise, but because I do think that in this life, we're meant to be there for one another. And I think we're meant to be kind to one another. And I think that we're meant to support one another, and to hear from other people that they feel that way about me makes me feel like I'm doing something right. And I know I mentioned that Maya Angelou is my favorite author, and she, has a quote that says generally, that people will always remember how you make them feel. And I think that that's really true. And I think that's really important. And life is such a finite thing. We're only here for such a short time. I think one of the greatest impacts that we can leave is making sure that other people, when they finish interacting with us, when they look back on the experiences that they have with us, that they are ones that they feel like really help them in a way or really enrich their life in a way.
So, as a coach, which you've touched on, what was the first time that you knew that you had this skill to lead and help people get to a better place? Was there a moment? Was there a client? How did that happen?
Yeah, it really sort of happened organically. I think when my writing journey became more public, I had more people who would sort of ask me if I'd be willing to look at their work. And in doing that, I started to realize that I really enjoyed doing that, and that it was incredibly helpful for other people to have sort of that really dedicated, committed person with them, helping them to work through everything from a plot hole to writer's block to I'm trying to figure out what agents to go out to and everything in between. So I can't really say if it was one moment or one person, but I have been really fortunate to have so many incredible mentorship experiences, incredible coaching experiences along the way with people who I'm just so excited to see like what they are doing and how they're progressing in their own journeys as writers at this point, because I know it's not easy and I know how hard they've worked, and it's just been such an honor and a blessing to be a part of their journey in any way that I could be.
So, Charlene, at the end of the day, everyone has a perception of you, family, friends, clients, everyone that knows you, but you're in control. You're in charge. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
I think that I am goal oriented to a fault sometimes. So I'm working on that. And I also think that I'm good. I think I'm a good person. And there's a lot of stuff I don't understand. And there's a lot of stuff I'm still trying to figure out. But at the end of the day, one of the things I can probably most confidently say about myself is I think I'm good. And that means more to me than anything else.
So, Charlene, if anyone wants to hire you, reach out, learn more about what you're doing, any of the good business, where do they go?
Yeah. So if you want to learn more about my books, I am online at charlenethomasbooks.com and Charlene Thomas Books on Instagram. And if you're interested in coaching services and a mentorship that I offer through my coaching services, you can go to storycoachingeditorial.com.
Excellent, Charlene. This has been wonderful. Thank you so much for your story. Thank you for your time. Have a wonderful 2025.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to another famous interview with Joe Dimino, where we cover the world of art, literature, business, spirituality, music, and more from around the globe. Our esteemed theme music was composed and produced by the great E.E. Pointer of Kansas City's River Cow Orchestra. If you want to hear more interviews, visit the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino channel on YouTube. You can also find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Thanks again for listening, and until next time.